My name is Alicia Shapiro with AInews.com, and welcome to another episode of our Driving Tomorrow Conversations with Industry Leaders, where we explore the latest developments and newest innovations in the world of artificial intelligence. Today, I'm excited to be speaking with Arsham Ghahramani, the co founder and CEO of Ribbon.ai, an AI powered platform that's redefining how we think about hiring. With a background in AI and biology and experience spanning everything from cancer gene regulation during his doctoral work to high frequency trading, Arsham brings interdisciplinary approach to innovation. Now with Ribbon, he's on a mission to make hiring 100 times faster by using natural voice AI to screen candidates, reduce bias, and help companies fill roles in under 24 hours. But Ribbon isn't just another recruiting tool. It's a full-scale AI native platform designed to fix the systemic inefficiencies in hiring. From 24/7 voice interviews that adapt in real time to instant summaries and smart analytics, Ribbon makes it easier for companies to identify top talent while delivering a more human, empowering experience for candidates. In today's interview, we'll explore how AI is transforming the recruitment journey from faster screenings and better matches to greater fairness, and how Ribbon is reshaping the future of hiring. Thank you for joining us today, Arsham.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. Excited to chat.
Oh, me too. I'm looking forward to our chat today. So let's start with Ribbon's mission. What personal or professional experiences led you to start building an AI recruiter tool? And was there a gap in the hiring process that made you believe that AI could be a better solution?
Yeah, maybe I can start by giving some background of where I started as well, because that was key to how we came into this journey. So
Sure.
I feel lucky enough that I was pretty early to like the AI world and like machine learning world in general. Like I was doing a PhD in 2014, which is long before a lot of the AI hype
Yeah.
came about. And then so I've seen that kind of wave of excitement there to where we are today, where like everyone's talking about AI now,
Mhm.
right? But in 2014, it was still very much like an academic world. I felt lucky enough that me and my co-founder Dave, who I actually met when I was working at a startup called Ezra, where I was the head of AI, he was the head of people and talent. And I feel lucky that we were pretty early to like understanding the implications of AI, especially within hiring. So even as far back as like 2018, we were talking about things like what happens if AI keeps getting better at the trajectory that it is? What does that do to the labor market? What does that do to the way that like people apply for jobs?
Yeah.
And I think one of the insights that we were pretty early to was like understanding that like especially on the job seeker side, if you look at the tools that the average like applicant has access to these days. They're like AI powered tools that help you apply to many jobs. They're
Yeah.
AI powered tools that help you and tell you what to say in the interview. And so like the level of applications is getting better and better, right? And like from an employer point of view, that means it's getting like harder and harder to understand like
Mhm.
what is like a real application, what is like a fully AI generated one.
Right. Yeah.
And so we looked at that side and then also realized that there is a gap on the other side as well. So as an employer, lots of employers these days, especially if you're like a recruitment team within a company, there's a lot of pressure on you to interview a lot of people. A lot of the interviews that you do are like no shows or they're with unqualified candidates as well. So we just felt like there was a gap on that side of the market, right? That if you're a recruiter in a recruitment team, there's not a lot of tools that help you out. There's a lot of pressure to interview a ton of people. And one of the insights that we had was that a solution in this space doesn't have to be zero sum. Like you can create something that is AI powered that can help candidates by giving them flexibility, that they can interview whenever they want. But then you can also help the employers as well by giving them a tool that helps them interview more efficiently. And so that was the kind of key insight. And I guess just to wrap that part up, like our core mission is that we think that this space doesn't have to be zero sum, that there are a lot of zero sum tools and platforms out there. But actually with AI, you can make the experience better for both employers and also applicants. And as a result of that, we think that every company should be able to hire about 10x faster than they can right now and ultimately 100x faster. And that's going to be a better thing for everyone since we'll spend a lot less time kind of applying for jobs
Yeah.
that are not relevant for us. And hopefully we'll spend a lot more time in jobs that we actually enjoy.
I love that. That's a great idea. But what are some of the biggest bottlenecks in the traditional hiring process, and how does Ribbon solve them?
Yeah, so there's a couple I can touch on there.
Okay.
One of the biggest bottlenecks is that recruiters spend a lot of time speaking to people who are either not genuinely interested in the role or don't have the right qualifications, right? And so
Right.
if you speak to like the median recruiter, they'll tell you just the amount of time, they probably spend 90% of their time on interviews where the person on the other side is just not a good fit fundamentally. And then, so what they're looking for is that kind of 10% who are actually a good fit are motivated to join the company. And this also goes both ways as well, right? As an applicant, you spend a lot of time speaking to companies where they're not actually interested in you as a profile, or they're ultimately looking for a different one. And so what we're trying to do is cut out a lot of that like upfront time. And so we see that as a strong kind of bottleneck that we can solve.
I love that. I know back when I was job hunting many years ago and trying to find a job, a lot of times you don't even hear back from the companies. Does this give the companies a more efficient way to even respond to the applicants?
That's something I feel super passionately about, actually. So most applicants, when you apply for a job, you essentially get ghosted, right? Like you often don't even get a rejection, you just
Right.
don't get back. And that is a horrible experience, right? It wasn't that long ago when I was applying for a bunch of jobs, and I remember that, and it just feels demoralizing.
Yeah.
So one thing that we're really proud of is that each and every applicant, after they do a ribbon interview, we will give them feedback immediately.
Oh, that's cool.
We actually have an AI agent that looks through the interview and will like generate feedback from what we see across the market. And so one of the things we hear from applicants over and over is that actually doing a ribbon interview was the first time when I was applying in the market where I felt like the other side actually cared. Like they weren't
Mhm.
just looking for whether I was a good fit for this job or not, but even beyond that interview, they gave me some feedback saying, here's how you can improve for your next interview or for the next job or whatever it is. And so that's something I'm really proud of that we do. And we show that we actually care about you much more than just this one application that you're doing.
Yeah, that's so nice. Like you said, the ghosting part is what's worse. I would rather just be told, "Oh, I'm sorry, you're not a good fit."
Actually, getting a quick no is an amazing thing for a lot of people because
Yeah,
then you don't have to sit in limbo. And I think that's an important part too.
exactly. And we mentioned that Ribbon uses voice-based AI interviews. Can you walk us through how those conversations work and what makes them feel more natural than maybe other digital interview methods?
So there's a couple of pieces that go into that. We have a collection of AI-powered tech that kind of ends up resulting in what is this natural conversation. And there's two kind of pieces to that. One is that we have a lot of customers who run a lot of interviews through our platform. As a result of that, we see a lot of interviews, and we probably have one of the largest interview data sets anywhere in the world right now.
Mhm.
And we've been able to turn that into a bit of a data moat and a tech moat as well. So since we see all these interviews, we've used that to train our models better and inform them on how to run a more natural conversation. And then the other piece is that we have a collection of different AI agents that control how the conversation flows.
Oh,
And I'll just give you an example. Like we have one agent that looks at the longer range conversation. So that will look at like what kind of topics should I cover over the next hour, right? Then we have another agent that looks at the shorter term conversation. So it'll look at like just that question and think, okay, what should be the next part of this question that I should ask? Or was there enough information within that answer? And so when you combine that with the fact that we have really strong voices that can show emotion, they can understand the emotion on the other side as well. All of that kind of turns into what as like a natural conversation that flows. And so just as an example, we hear from around 80% of the people who do one of our calls say that the level of voice quality is the same as a human being.
wow.
And when you're actually in one of these conversations, you end up just almost forgetting that you're speaking to an AI and it feels very natural.
I like that. Yeah, that's cool. With AI screening some of the interviews and applicants, can you walk us through the AI screening process? Like, I'm sure people are a little nervous about, oh, what if AI thinks I'm not a good candidate? How do I appeal? Can I get a human involved? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'd say one of the misnomers is that we have an AI that makes decisions and like the AI is kind of judging you.
Yeah.
The Our philosophy there is that there's always a human in the loop. The human is like ultimately who makes the decisions. The AI is never really making the decision. What we try to aim to do is we just want to surface up the right information, right? What is the key info that can help a recruit to actually make a decision? And so I really see us more as almost like we take a really wide range of information and we try to condense that down into what's the key stuff, right? One example there, if you do like a 1 hour long interview, that's a lot of text, a lot of audio, it's
Yeah.
hard to go through. And so what we try to do is surface just the key clips within that 1 hour that shows information that's not in the resume, not in the cover letter. And so that's one of the ways that we help recruiters. The other way is we do score certain factors, but we always try to ground that score in like a factual piece of information that was in the interview, right? So we will never just give like a score of here's like 4 out of 5. We'll always say, okay, this is a 4 out of 5, and here's the reason why, because the candidate said this at this point in the interview. They also said this, and we were able to cross-check that with their resume as well or something else. So yeah, like a lot of the screening aspect of what we do is really just surfacing up the right info so that as a recruiter, your life is easier because you can say, okay, I have the Spark notes for this candidate, and this is all I need to know.
That makes sense. And I'm sure that, like you said, it does help the recruiters make better decisions with those insights and those candidate assessment scores and interview summaries. So that's fantastic. Anything to make their job easier, I imagine.
Exactly.
And with interviewing and job hiring, bias and fairness is a major concern for people. How does Ribbon's AI approach help reduce that bias but still improve efficiency?
It's a great question. So we think a lot about bias, and I'll just kind of give some background as well. So I started in the AI health tech world. And so in health tech, if you get bias wrong, it's really a matter of life or death, right? So if you're biased in a certain way for a treatment or some kind of screening, ultimately the outcome is really bad. And so we had to think a lot about kind of bias in that world. And so we brought along a lot of those techniques for how you kind of manage bias into Ribbon as well. And it's something that has always been important for me. So there's two key things we do in that space. One is that we're always monitoring for bias. So whether it's an interview that is driven by the AI, we have a real-time, essentially like monitoring of the interview to look for are there any things that was said by our interviewer that should not have been, that led the candidate kind of in the wrong way, or was there any sign of showing bias in there? So I think one kind of key aspect is that like, real-time monitoring. The other is that we also run studies after groups of interviews and we look for, okay, if a company used Ribbon for one role and then for a different role, they were not using Ribbon,
Oh,
is there any kind of bias introduced? And the only kind of bias that you ever want to look for is that you have exactly the same kind of demographics, but you have candidates who ultimately perform better in the role, right? That's the only bias that you ever want. But like in terms of demographics, gender, all those other things, we always run studies and we have never found any evidence for bias there.
yeah, that's
And
great.
the final thing I'll mention there as well is that what we hear actually from a lot of teams that use Ribbon is that after using Ribbon, it's the first time that they felt like they ever actually had any kind of information about the bias within their organization. So
Oh,
what happens with a lot of recruitment teams is they have all these interviews that are happening all over the organization, but they don't really have any kind of insight into was there any bias within those interviews.
right.
And so for a lot of companies, when they use us, it's the first time they've ever even had any kind of hard like data on is there bias or not.
That could be really eye-opening for them.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not something I thought about before we started Ribbon, but
Yeah.
now that we're so deep into it, you just realize that most companies don't even know actually whether there is bias or not.
Yeah, because as a company, you try hard not to do that, but you might still have something in there that you're not aware of. So that's fantastic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like we mentioned, Ribbon is already being used by hundreds of companies. What kind of results are they seeing and how do they measure success? And on the other side of the equation, what kind of feedback have you received from job seekers using Ribbon?
Yes, good question. So what we typically see is the company that starts using Ribbon is able to cut down the end-to-end hiring time by around 40%, right?
Wow.
So if you typically see like a 100-day cycle to hire a candidate, that would be down to around 60 days or so, and that kind of scales down as well. Then, so that's one aspect of it, but we don't just pride ourselves on faster hiring. I think faster is one thing,
Mm.
but the other part that we're actually really proud of is that what we see is typically a company that uses Ribbon, when they hire that person, they're 30% more likely to stay at that company than another company that doesn't use Ribbon. And so the higher retention there, I think is really important because you ultimately don't just want to hire people faster, but you want to
Hmm.
hire better people who are happier in that job. And so I think the whole industry should shift towards that actually, of like, how do we hire people who really enjoy this job, are a good fit, and ultimately stay? I think hiring faster is a great also plus out of all that too, but it shouldn't be the kind of main concern, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's for sure. I've heard that it costs more to get a new employee than it is to keep one, or maybe I've got it the other way around. Anyway, but to have less turnover is amazing because then you're not spending all this money training new people all the time. Yeah, if
That
you can do it from a quality standpoint, that's even better.
Exactly. And I think it's so underrated, right? Like the best hire in a way is not having to hire at all in the first place because you kept the previous person or like you had higher retention. And so I think a lot of companies underrate that, but that's something we're helping them on.
That's great. I love that. And looking ahead, how do you see AI shaping not just recruitment, but the future of work itself?
So one thing that has been clear, and this is not really like a comment on whether I think it's like a good trend or not, but if you look over the last kind of 20 years, the average time that people spend in a role has been decreasing, right? So like we are hopping jobs more often. I think as a result of that, like that means that overall across the economy, there are just more interviews than there have ever been, right? Because we're like spending less time in one single job. Gone are the days when you spend 30 years in one role.
Yeah.
And so we've thought a lot about what's like the ultimate kind of end game there. I think one place where Ribbon can really help like job seekers in general is that if there will be a lot more job hopping,
Mm.
what you want to get to is a job that you really enjoy or a good fit for as fast as possible, right? And so I think if I look maybe like 100 years from now, which I know is far-fetched, I think ultimately we'll be using systems like Ribbon to help us find a job in a very short amount of time. It could be like you will be finding a job in 1 hour, right?
Mhm.
And you can go through an ultra fast like recruitment process. And once you're in that job, as soon as you don't feel like it's a good fit anymore, that could be after 1 week, 1 year, 1 decade, whatever that is, that you can easily look for and find another job, and that it won't be a long and drawn out process, right? So instead of having 100 days in between jobs, if you want to start a new job the next week, you'll be able to because we'll have an ultra fast like hiring cycle.
Yeah, that's really cool. And before we wrap up, I always love to ask when you do step away from your work, what are some activities or hobbies you're passionate about?
Yeah, I play a lot of football or soccer, I
Uh,
guess, as we call it in North America. That's something, yeah, I've been really into. And then honestly, I'm really into rockets and just like learning and reading about rockets in general. So that's something I spend a lot of time kind of reading and watching YouTube videos on.
yeah, that's really cool. I love that. Thank you so much, Arsham, for sharing your journey and the innovative ways that Ribbon is using AI to transform hiring. It's really been a fun conversation about how technology can create a faster, fairer, and more human recruitment experience for everyone. I just love the idea of this company. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot for having me on.
Oh, yeah. And if you'd like to learn more about Ribbon, you can visit their website, ribbon.ai. Keeping you connected to tomorrow. Today, this is Alicia with AInews.com.